Stefon Diggs is officially a Washington Commander, and players around the team are already reacting. From K'Lavon Chaisson's welcome to one reaction that's got everyone talking, here's what happened. Let's start with the moment the news actually broke. Wednesday, word came down that free agent wide receiver Stefon Diggs was set to sign a one-year deal worth up to $12 million with the Washington Commanders, giving the team a proven receiver opposite Terry McLaurin, according to sources told to NFL Network's Ian Rappaport and ESPN's Adam Schefter. Just like that, months of rumors turned into a signature on a contract. The timing matters here. This wasn't some quiet off-season transaction buried in a Tuesday news dump. The Washington Commanders added a big-name veteran to the receiving corps, with the signing of Diggs to a one-year $12 million contract, as NFL teams were progressing through the first full week of training camps. Players were already sweating through two-a-days. Depth charts were already being drawn up, and then this landed right in the middle of it. For Diggs personally, this wasn't just any city. Diggs was born in suburban Washington and played collegiately at Maryland, and had made his desire to play for the Commanders known. He didn't hide how badly he wanted this. Before the deal was even finalized, Diggs attended Maryland's first fall practice, and the university shared a video message on Instagram from the former Terrapins wide receiver, where he shouted out his Terps and said, "Go Commanders." That's a guy campaigning for a job in real time, on camera, weeks before it happened. Now here's where the locker room angle really kicks in, because Diggs didn't just have fans clamoring for him to show up. He had teammates, future teammates, back before the ink dried after Diggs posted a workout video on social media. Commanders edge rusher K'Lavon Chaisson became the latest player to publicly outline his approval if the wideout joined Washington. And it wasn't a one-way street. Diggs gave Chaisson's comment a positive response, which wasn't exactly a surprise. The two of them had already been through a season together. That connection goes back to New England. Diggs and Chaisson were teammates on the Patriots last season, and they both played significant roles in the team's rise, from also-rans to AFC champions before falling short in the Super Bowl. So when Chaisson signed with Washington in free agency, he brought inside knowledge of exactly what Diggs could do for an offense, and he made sure Diggs knew Washington's door was open. That's one voice from inside the building, but the receiver room itself had been begging for exactly this kind of addition for weeks. Before Diggs ever put pen to paper, reporting out of Washington painted a picture of a receiver corps that knew it needed reinforcements. The Commanders made some big off-season moves, but there was a serious argument. The roster still needed work, particularly at wide receiver, where things looked pretty dire on the depth chart behind Terry McLaurin. That's not outside noise. That's the environment the players themselves were living in every single day of camp. And McLaurin specifically was the guy carrying the weight of that shortage. Reporting out of the building made clear that veteran Terry McLaurin led the receiver group as an established top target, but the former Pro Bowler had missed 7 games the previous season due to a leg injury, and before adding Diggs, Washington lacked a clear second option behind him. Every rep, every deep ball, every contested catch, it was falling on one guy. That's the backdrop that made Diggs walking into the building feel less like a depth move and more like relief. Then there's Jayden Daniels. The quarterback wasn't out there tweeting fire emojis or posting cryptic hype videos, but the connection between him and this signing was baked into the reporting from the jump. A report from late last month indicated Diggs was intrigued by the chance to play with quarterback Jayden Daniels in Washington, and he would now get a chance to do that. For a young quarterback trying to build something in only his second full season as a starter, adding a receiver with Diggs' resume wasn't just a roster upgrade. It was a signal from the front office and from Diggs himself that this era in Washington is worth signing up for. And that leads into the part of this story that made the whole thing feel like more than just a transaction. Because for months, there had been another name buzzing around the exact same conversation: Brandon Aiyuk. The move to sign Diggs comes after the Commanders spent the offseason being mentioned as a landing spot for disgruntled 49ers wideout Brandon Aiyuk, who openly discussed his desire to join the team, but Washington and San Francisco never made a trade, and Aiyuk remained on the 49ers reserve left squad list. So while Diggs was quietly showing up to Maryland practices and trading public love with Chaisson, Aiyuk was out there, loudly declaring himself the answer to Washington's receiver problem. Aiyuk claimed last month he would be the final piece of the Commanders' offense, but he still hadn't applied for reinstatement from the reserve left squad list. 2 receivers, 1 job opening. 2 completely different approaches. One showed up and worked, the other posted from the sideline. That contrast set the stage for everything that came next. Because once Washington actually made its choice, the reaction wasn't just about who got the roster spot. It was about what that choice said about the kind of team the Commanders are trying to build. And that's where we're headed next. Once the Diggs deal became real, the story split into two very different directions. On one side, you had a locker room getting a proven target. On the other, you had a receiver who'd spent the entire offseason publicly assuming he had a seat at that same table and just watched it disappear. Let's back up on Aiyuk for a second, because his situation wasn't just unsigned free agent waiting for a call. It was messier than that. Aiyuk was away from the 49ers for most of last season, leading the club to place him on the reserve left squad list in December. And the 49ers had previously voided around $26 million in guarantees in his contract. The summer before, though he never filed a grievance with the union. He wasn't a free agent in the traditional sense. He was a player in limbo, still technically tied to a team that didn't want him, refusing to file the paperwork that would actually set him loose. And through all of that, he kept talking. Aiyuk continued to keep his distance from the 49ers, who retained his rights, while taking numerous shots at them on social media. Some of those shots reportedly extended beyond San Francisco. According to one report on how this all played out, Aiyuk's actions on social media, including trolling Commanders quarterback and friend Jaden Daniels, seemingly canceled out any deal, which opened the door for Diggs to join the team. Think about that for a second. If that reporting holds up, Aiyuk didn't lose this job because Washington found a better player on paper. He lost it because he couldn't stop taking shots at the exact quarterback he was trying to convince to catch passes from him. That's not a scouting decision, that's a locker room fit decision. The kind that gets made by players and coaches who've been watching a guy's behavior for months and decided they didn't want it walking through their doors. Outside reporting backed up just how much that behavior weighed on Washington's thinking. The Commanders chose Stefon Diggs over Brandon Aiyuk, whose off-putting behavior has NFL teams privately expressing concerns about his locker room fit. And it wasn't just idle chatter. It was described as a full-on public statement of what NFL personnel people had been privately telling reporters about Aiyuk's behavior for months before the signing ever happened. Contrast that with how Washington actually got interested in Aiyuk in the first place. Washington had been paying attention to Aiyuk's situation with the 49ers going back months. This wasn't a passing thought. It was a real avenue the front office considered. But the Commanders expressed some interest in Aiyuk with the 49ers months earlier, though that interest waned as the drama around him kept piling up. One outlet put it bluntly, framing the entire situation as a cautionary tale, noting that one could only imagine how Aiyuk would react to the news, that the team offering his best chance for playing this season had gone in another direction, and that it might serve as a lesson for him to cut back on his conduct. So while that drama played out in public, Diggs offered the opposite. No standoffs, no voided guarantees, no grievance filings. Just a guy who showed up to a college practice in a video and said he wanted the job. The difference in temperament between the two situations became its own kind of story inside the building. One receiver who made things easy for the front office, and one who apparently made it easy for them to walk away. And it wasn't lost on the fan base either. Reaction across social media leaned hard into the split-screen nature of the moment. Fan reactions were swift once the Diggs news broke, with plenty of chatter specifically framed around what it meant for Aiyuk's now-stalled situation in San Francisco. The optics were simple. One guy waited patiently and worked out in his college gear. The other kept escalating a feud with people who could have handed him a fresh start. There's also a financial layer here that's worth pointing out, because it shows just how much value Washington got by picking the low-drama option. Per ASEP-PN's Adam Schefter, the Commanders signed Diggs to a one-year deal, worth up to $12 million. A decent bargain for a four-time Pro Bowl receiver, with Spotrac estimating his market value closer to $13.8 million annually on a two-year deal. Washington didn't just avoid a headache, they got a discount doing it. None of this happened in a vacuum for the players already on the roster either. Stefon Diggs' public backing of Diggs weeks before the deal wasn't just a nice gesture between former Patriots teammates. It was one player in the building vouching for exactly the kind of veteran presence Washington ended up choosing over the more chaotic alternative. That's the kind of internal signal front offices actually listen to. So by the time the signing became official, it wasn't really a coin flip anymore. It was the conclusion of a months-long split screen, one receiver building trust quietly, the other burning it publicly. And Washington's receiver room, The one that had been waiting on an answer all camp finally got theirs. Now let's talk about the guy this move was really built around. Not Diggs, but McLaurin. Because to understand why the locker room reacted the way it did, you have to understand exactly how much weight McLaurin had been carrying and how thin things had gotten behind him. Go back to the start of camp. Washington's receiver depth chart behind McLaurin wasn't just unproven. It was a question mark stacked on more question marks. Outside of McLaurin, the next three options on Washington's depth chart entering camp were former first-round pick Treylon Burks, Luke McCaffrey, and rookie Antonio Williams, leaving plenty of room for a player of Diggs' caliber to immediately step into the lineup. That's a group with one established name and a whole lot of we'll see. One fantasy analyst broke down the exact same math from a different offense. Chris Allen pointed out that Washington as a landing spot for Diggs made a lot of sense. Once you looked at the depth chart, Treylon Burks was set to be the number 2 wideout behind McLaurin, and behind those two was a hodgepodge of names, including Van Jefferson, Dyami Brown, and Luke McCaffrey. Nobody in that room was walking into training camp feeling like the job was locked down, which meant nobody in that room was surprised when the front office went out and got a 4-time Pro Bowler instead. The team's local coverage put an even finer point on just how significant McLaurin's absence had been the year before. Diggs gives Washington a stronger second option alongside McLaurin, whose string of 5 consecutive 1,000-yard seasons was snapped last year due to injury, and Washington's lack of receiver depth was evident in 2025, when McLaurin missed 7 games with a quad injury, and Noah Brown missed 13 games with knee and groin issues. And when both of your top 2 receivers go down in the same season, you find out real fast who's actually available. The result was that 5 players who weren't even on the roster at the start of the season ended up catching passes for the team. That's not a receiver room, that's a fire drill. So when Diggs' name started circulating, it wasn't hype for hype's sake. It was a direct answer to a problem the entire building had lived through the year before. Local reporting on the signing framed it in exactly those terms. Washington Commanders quarterback Jaden Daniels got a new weapon when the team agreed to sign wide receiver Stefon Diggs to a 1-year deal worth up to $12 million. And that framing wasn't accidental. Every story about this signing led with Daniels because everyone understood the quarterback was the one who stood to benefit most from finally having 2 trustworthy targets instead of 1. Local coverage broke down exactly what that means on the field. Day to day, one report walked through the ripple effect Diggs' presence is expected to have on the rest of the room. Diggs being there will have an impact on the other receivers. They might not get as much work because Diggs is going to be on the field, and you don't add a star veteran player if you're not going to play him. But that same reporting also framed it as a net positive for everyone involved, arguing that if Diggs is out there drawing attention from corners, while defenses also have to focus on McLaurin, it may mean more opportunities for players like Williams or McCaffrey elsewhere on the field, ultimately making Washington a better football team. That's the version of this signing that doesn't get talked about enough. It's not just about Diggs versus McLaurin for targets. It's about what happens to a rookie like Antonio Williams or a developmental guy like McCaffrey when 2 established veterans start eating up double coverage. Suddenly, the matchups those younger guys are getting look a lot friendlier. On the specifics of what Diggs still brings physically, the reporting was blunt. This isn't a receiver just riding a name from years ago. Diggs has remained productive and can play inside and outside, and he averaged a career-best 2.77 yards per route run and 4.2 yards after the catch last season, his best total since 2019, while surpassing 1,000 yards in the last 7 seasons in which he played at least 10 games. And it wasn't just the numbers. Patriots players and coaches praised his leadership last season en route to a Super Bowl appearance. That's the exact kind of testimonial that carries weight in a locker room. Not he's talented, but he made the room better. There's also the piece about who Washington passed on before landing here. This wasn't a first choice, only choice situation. Washington had wanted to sign Alec Pierce, but he re-signed with Indianapolis before free agency. And one league source said Pierce would have signed with the Commanders had he come free. They also tried and failed to sign Romeo Doubs, and Carnell Tate would have been an option had he been available with the 7th pick. So by the time Diggs entered the picture, this front office had already whiffed on multiple plans. That context matters. It means the guys in that receiver room watched their front office chase solution after solution all offseason before finally landing one that stuck. And once it did stick, the framing from inside the building shifted almost instantly from who's going to help McLaurin to how do we use both of these guys. That shift from scarcity to competition for targets in a good way is exactly the kind of shift a receiver room notices in real time. It changes practice reps, it changes route installs, it changes who defenses are forced to respect on third down. That sets up the next piece of this, because getting Diggs signed is one thing. Getting him fully cleared, trusted, and locked in as a full participant required clearing up something much bigger than a depth chart problem. Here's the part of this story that made Diggs' free agency drag out as long as it did, and why some teams passed on him even with his production still intact. It wasn't just about age or scheme fit, it was about a courtroom. Teams likely passed on Diggs, who turns 33 in late November, due to concerns about his age and a legal situation. His former personal chef had accused him of assault and strangulation. That's not a small allegation. That's the kind of thing that can end a career regardless of how many yards a guy is putting up on Sundays. The specifics matter here. On May 4, Diggs was found not guilty of felony strangulation, as well as assault and battery charges against his personal chef, Jamila Adams. A jury heard the case and cleared him. But even after an acquittal, the NFL still had its own process to run. The league also investigated the situation and determined there was insufficient evidence to suspend him for violation of the personal conduct policy. Two separate processes, a criminal trial and a league review, both landed in the same place, no punishment. That timeline explains a lot about why the Patriots handled things the way they did. Reporting on his release connected the dots directly. In moving on from Diggs, the Patriots also avoided a potential 2026 suspension for the 32-year-old. At the time, he was facing strangulation and assault charges over the alleged incident with his former chef. But after a Boston jury acquitted Diggs in May, the NFL announced in June that it did not have enough evidence to hand down punishment. So here's the layer that a lot of outside chatter missed. Diggs wasn't released because he played poorly. Financially, the numbers back that up completely. Diggs was the Patriots' leading receiver in 2025, the first season of a 3-year, $69 million contract. But they released him a few weeks after their Super Bowl LX loss, a move that saved the team $16.8 million and cleared a path to add two pricey new starting receivers. That's a cap decision dressed up as a roster decision, wrapped around a legal cloud that made the whole thing easier to justify publicly. And once he hit the market clean, cleared by a jury, cleared by the league, the calculus for other teams changed. Washington was one of the ones willing to move first. That's a real signal about how the Commanders' front office, and by extension the players in that building, viewed the whole situation. They weren't ignoring what happened. They were watching two separate systems clear him and deciding that was enough to bring him in. It's worth sitting with how differently the football world reacted to Diggs walking away from his old team versus how it reacted to him walking into a new one. When the release from New England first came down, the reaction from that fan base leaned almost entirely into how much he'd meant to that locker room, legal situation aside. Diggs had signed with the Patriots the year before and helped turn a losing franchise into a 14-3 team with a kind of swagger that hadn't been seen since Tom Brady was there, even though plenty of others had a lot to do with the turnaround. One moment got singled out repeatedly by people who covered that team, a phrase Diggs used in a huddle before New England's Week 5 upset win over Buffalo carried the team through the season, the playoffs, and ultimately to the Super Bowl. That's not the reputation of a locker room cancer. That's the reputation of a guy players rally around. So by the time he landed in Washington, the receiver room he was walking into had two competing pieces of information to weigh. On one hand, a jury acquittal, a league clearance, and a track record of teammates and coaches praising his leadership. On the other, a legal situation serious enough that it scared other teams off the signing entirely, even with his production fully intact. The Commanders' front office made its read, and it landed on the side of trust. Adam Peters and the front office had already shown, through the Aiyuk situation, that character concerns could sink a deal entirely regardless of talent. The fact that Diggs still got the contract tells you the building felt the legal chapter was genuinely closed, not just quietly ignored. That's a lot of context to process for a locker room in the middle of training camp. But it's also exactly the kind of situation NFL players have seen play out before with other teammates, other allegations, other verdicts. The instinct in most rooms is to let the legal system do its job, and then judge the guy on what he brings once he's cleared to be there. And by every account coming out of Washington, That's exactly how this locker room approached it. Stefon vouching for him before it was official. The receiver room bracing for a talent infusion it desperately needed, and a front office that had already shown it was willing to walk away from a talented player over character concerns, choosing to bring this one in anyway. That combination, the legal clearance, the on-field need, and the pre-existing relationships already in the building, is what turned this from a simple free agent signing into something the whole roster had opinions about well before it happened. So where does this actually leave the Commanders as camp rolls forward? Diggs is in the building. The receiver room finally has its second name next to McLaurin's. And the version of this story that gets told from here on out is about what he actually does with the opportunity. The contract itself tells you a lot about how both sides are approaching this. The Commanders signed Diggs to a one-year contract worth up to $12 million. 1 year. Not a long-term commitment, not a multi-year bet on a receiver turning 33 in the fall. This is built as a prove-it deal for both parties. Diggs proving he's still the guy who ranked at the top of the league in one specific, telling category, and Washington proving its offense can support two legitimate weapons at once. And that ranking is worth repeating, because it's the strongest on-field argument for why this signing matters. Stefon Diggs ranked number 1 in the NFL among wide receivers last season in reception percentage, catching 82.5% of his targets. Some outlets had that number even higher. His 83.3% catch rate was the second highest by a wide receiver in the past 45 seasons, trailing only Michael Thomas's 85% mark back in 2018. Whatever the exact figure, the point stands. This isn't a receiver who needs volume to be effective. He catches almost everything thrown his way. For a young quarterback like Daniels, that's the kind of target you build trust with fast. Diggs himself has made clear he's not walking in quietly, hoping for scraps behind McLaurin. Back in July, in a video on his own channel, he made his stance on where he ranks league-wide unmistakable, saying pointedly that nobody could name a number 2 receiver better than him, before adding that he'd let people call whoever they wanted their number 1 and still stand by that claim. That's the mindset walking into this receiver room. Not a complimentary piece playing a supporting role, but a player who still sees himself as one of the best at his position, period. That kind of self-belief plays differently depending on the room. In a room already unsettled, it can create friction. But by every account coming out of Washington's building, Stefon public support before the deal, the front office's willingness to overlook a stalled legal situation once it cleared, the reshuffling optimism about what double coverage does for younger receivers. This looks like a room that welcomed exactly that kind of confidence rather than bristling at it. There's also the matter of what didn't happen, which says almost as much as what did. Washington never made the Aiyuk trade. Aiyuk remains on the 49ers' reserve left squad list for the time being, still unresolved, still not officially a free agent, months after first naming Washington as his preferred destination. One outlet's read on his path forward was straightforward. Aiyuk claimed he would be the final piece of the Commanders' offense, but still hadn't applied for reinstatement, and if he finally does, it would clear the way for the 49ers to release him. A team might take a flyer on him if he reaches the open market, but Washington had already found a more stable solution in Diggs. That door isn't fully shut anywhere in the league, but in Washington specifically, it's closed. The room made its choice, and it wasn't him. For McLaurin, this is the partnership he's effectively been asking for since last season ended, in an injury-shortened year, in a receiver room stretched thin. He's no longer the only proven name defenses have to account for. For Daniels, it's the second true weapon that reporting all offseason said he needed to take the next step. For the young guys, Williams, McCaffrey, the rest of that group fighting for reps, it's a chance to develop in matchups that aren't getting a defense's full attention. Rather than being thrown into the fire as the primary plan the way they were, the year injuries piled up. And for Diggs, it's a one-year audition in the place he grew up wanting to play, wearing the colors of the school he actually played for. Catching passes from a quarterback he specifically said intrigued him enough to want this exact job. He got here without a trade demand, without a public standoff, without burning a bridge on his way out the door in New England, the way the timeline of his release could have easily framed him. Instead, the picture that emerges is a receiver who showed up to a college practice in the offseason and said he wanted this. A pass rusher already in the building who publicly co-signed him before the ink was dry. A receiver room that had been quietly bracing for exactly this kind of addition all camp. And a front office that, when faced with two very different personalities chasing the same job, chose the one who made the decision easy. That's the story of how Stefon Diggs ended up in Washington, and how the players already wearing that uniform reacted to him getting there.